Sarah Mitchell pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the news van. The December wind cut through the small mountain town like a knife, carrying with it the promise of more snow. As a field reporter for Channel 7 News, she had covered countless stories in harsh weather, but something about this assignment felt different. The town of Pine Ridge had been hit by an unexpected blizzard 3 days ago, leaving residents stranded and emergency services overwhelmed. Her golden retriever, Max, jumped down from the passenger seat, his thick coat already dusted with fresh snowflakes. Sarah never went anywhere without Max. He had been her constant companion for 5 years, ever since she rescued him from a shelter. What started as companionship had evolved into something more meaningful when Max proved to have an uncanny ability to sense when people were in trouble. Local police had even called on them several times when search and rescue operations needed extra help. The assignment was supposed to be routine. Cover the aftermath of the storm, interview a few residents about power outages and road conditions, then head back to the station before the next wave of snow arrived. Sarah checked her equipment one last time while her cameraman, Jake, adjusted his gear. The wind howled through the pine trees that gave the town its name, creating an eerie soundtrack to their work. "Let's start with the community center," Sarah suggested, pointing to a large brick building where warm light spilled from the windows. That's where most of the displaced families are staying. As they walked across the snow-covered parking lot, Max suddenly stopped. His ears perked up and he began sniffing the air with unusual intensity. Sarah had learned to trust Max's instincts completely. The dog had once led her to a gas leak that could have caused a massive explosion. And another time he had detected a missing child trapped in a storm drain during a flood story. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, crouching down to Max's level. The dog whined softly and looked toward a cluster of trees behind the community center. His body language was tense, alert. Something was wrong. Jake noticed the interaction and lowered his camera. "Everything okay?" "Max is picking up on something," Sarah replied, studying her dog's behavior. "He only acts like this when someone needs help." The snow was falling more heavily now, creating a white curtain that made it difficult to see more than 50 feet in any direction. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, following Max as he padded through the deep snow toward the tree line. Each step sank nearly to her knees, and she could hear Jake struggling behind her with his equipment. "Sarah, maybe we should stick to the original plan," Jake called out, his voice muffled by the wind. "The weather's getting worse." But Max was moving with purpose now, his nose close to the ground. Sarah had seen this behavior before. He was tracking something or someone. Her reporter instincts kicked in, overriding her concern about the weather. If someone was out here in this storm, they could be in serious danger. The trees provided some shelter from the wind, but the temperature seemed to drop even further in the shadows. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as she followed Max deeper into the small wooded area. Pine needles and snow crunched under their feet, and the only sounds were the wind and Max's steady panting. Suddenly, Max stopped and began digging frantically in the snow near the base of a large pine tree. Sarah hurried over, her heart racing. As she knelt beside her dog and began brushing away the snow with her gloved hands, her flashlight beam caught something that made her gasp. It was fabric. Blue fabric, partially buried under at least 2 feet of snow. Sarah's training as a journalist had taught her to remain calm in crisis situations, but her hands shook as she continued to clear away the snow. Within moments, she could see it was a person, a young girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, lying motionless and covered in snow. "Jake," Sarah shouted, her voice carrying a note of urgency she had never heard in herself before. "Call 911 now." The girl's skin was pale, almost blue from the cold. Sarah checked for a pulse with trembling fingers and felt a weak but steady heartbeat. The child was alive, but barely. She appeared to be unconscious, and Sarah could tell she had been out here for hours, possibly since the storm began. Jake stumbled through the snow toward them, already dialing emergency services on his phone. "Is she alive?" "Yes, but she's hypothermic," Sarah replied, carefully brushing snow away from the girl's face. "We need to get her warm, but we have to be careful not to move her too much." As Jake spoke rapidly with the 911 dispatcher, Sarah took off her own coat and carefully wrapped it around the girl. Max seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and lay down beside the child, using his body heat to provide additional warmth. "Ambulance is on the way," Jake reported, "but they're saying it could be 20 minutes or more because of the road conditions." Sarah looked at the girl's face more closely in the flashlight beam. Despite being nearly frozen, there was something familiar about her features. She couldn't place it immediately, but something nagged at the back of her mind. The girl was wearing clothes that seemed too thin for the harsh weather. Just jeans, a light sweater, and sneakers that were completely soaked through. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Jake. What was a kid doing out here alone in a blizzard? And where are her winter clothes? The girl's lips moved slightly and Sarah leaned closer. She was trying to say something, but the words were barely audible whispers. Sarah strained to listen, catching fragments. They said, "Wouldn't look here." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the cold weather. Those few words suggested this wasn't just a case of a child getting lost in a storm. There was something more sinister at play here. Max continued to lie protectively beside the girl, occasionally lifting his head to look around the forest as if sensing danger. Sarah found herself scanning the tree line as well, suddenly aware that whoever had left this child here might still be nearby. As they waited for help to arrive, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who was this girl? How had she ended up buried in the snow behind a community center? And most importantly, who were they that she had mentioned? The wind picked up again, sending fresh snow swirling around them. Sarah held the girl's hand through her gloves, whispering reassurances and praying that help would arrive in time. The ambulance sirens pierced through the howling wind as paramedics finally arrived at the scene. Sarah watched anxiously as they worked to stabilize the girl, whose body temperature had dropped to dangerously low levels. The child had regained consciousness briefly during the wait, long enough to whisper a single word that sent chills through Sarah's body. "Emma. Is that your name, sweetheart?" Sarah had asked gently, but the girl had slipped back into unconsciousness before answering. At Pine Ridge General Hospital, Sarah paced the waiting room while Jake edited footage on his laptop. The story had taken an unexpected turn from a routine weather report to something much more complex and troubling. Max lay at Sarah's feet, still alert and restless after their discovery in the woods. Dr. Patricia Hernandez emerged from the emergency room, her expression serious but cautiously optimistic. "The girl is stable now. We've managed to bring her body temperature back to normal, and there's no sign of permanent damage from the hypothermia. She's incredibly lucky you found her when you did." "Can we see her?" Sarah asked. "I'd like to make sure she's okay and maybe find out how she ended up out there." The doctor hesitated. "She's awake, but she seems very frightened. She won't tell us her name or how to contact her family. When we ask about what happened, she just shakes her head and says she can't remember." Sarah's reporter instincts told her there was more to the story. Children didn't just end up buried in snow behind community centers during blizzards. Someone had put her there, and the girl's earlier whispered words suggested she was hiding from people who meant her harm. "Has anyone reported a missing child?" Sarah inquired. "That's what's strange," Dr. Hernandez replied. "We've checked with local police and social services. No missing person reports match her description. It's as if she doesn't exist in any official capacity." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. A child with no official record, found half frozen in the woods, afraid to reveal her identity. These were hallmarks of something much darker than a simple case of getting lost. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Max quietly entered the girl's hospital room. The child looked tiny in the large hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. Her long brown hair had been cleaned and brushed, revealing a face that Sarah now realized she had definitely seen before, though she couldn't remember where. "Hi there," Sarah said softly, taking a seat beside the bed. "I'm Sarah, and this is Max. He's the one who found you in the snow." The girl's eyes widened when she saw Max, and for the first time since they'd found her, she smiled slightly. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from the cold. "He likes you too," Sarah replied. "Max has a special gift for finding people who need help." "Can you tell me your name?" The girl's expression immediately changed, becoming guarded and fearful. I can't. They said if I ever told anyone my real name, they'd hurt me worse than before." Sarah's heart sank. The child's words confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't just about getting lost in a storm. This was about abuse, possibly trafficking. Definitely something that required immediate police involvement. "Sweetheart, no one is going to hurt you here," Sarah said gently. "The doctors and nurses are here to take care of you, and the police can protect you from whoever scared you." You don't understand, the girl said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. They have other kids too. If I talk, they'll hurt them. They told us what happens to girls who try to run away. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Multiple children were involved. This was bigger than one lost child. This was an organized operation. She pulled out her phone and quickly sent a text to her contact at the local police department, Detective Mike Rodriguez, whom she had worked with on several stories over the years. What if I told you that talking might actually help save those other children? Sarah asked carefully. Sometimes the only way to stop bad people is to let good people know what's happening. The girl studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then looked at Max, who had positioned himself protectively beside her bed. Something in the dog's calm presence seemed to give her courage. My name is Emma, she finally whispered. Emma Chen. I'm 13 years old and I haven't seen my real family in 8 months. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took notes on her phone. 8 months. This child had been missing for 8 months, and somehow no one had reported it or found any trace of her until now. Emma. That's a beautiful name, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Can you tell me about the people who took you? Where have you been living? Emma glanced toward the door nervously before continuing. There were 4 of us girls in the house, different ages. We weren't allowed to go outside or talk to anyone except the people who owned us. The last 2 words came out as barely a whisper. Sarah had covered human trafficking stories before, but hearing it directly from a victim, especially one so young, made her feel sick with anger and helplessness. She forced herself to remain calm for Emma's sake. Where is this house, Emma? Can you remember anything about the location? I think it was maybe an hour from here in the mountains. There were lots of trees, and I could hear water running like a creek or river. The house was big and old, with a basement where they kept us most of the time. Sarah made careful notes, knowing that every detail could be crucial for law enforcement. How did you get away? Emma's eyes filled with tears again. Yesterday, one of the men was drinking a lot. He left the basement door unlocked when he went upstairs. I knew it might be my only chance. I took some clothes from upstairs and ran into the woods. I walked all night in the snow trying to get as far away as possible. That was incredibly brave, Sarah told her, meaning every word. But how did you end up behind the community center? I saw the lights and thought maybe I could find help, but then I heard a car coming up the road. I got scared it might be them looking for me, so I hid in the trees. I was so cold and tired, I couldn't stay awake anymore. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes of Sarah's text. A seasoned investigator in his 50s. He had worked dozens of missing persons cases but rarely dealt with human trafficking in their small mountain community. This is way bigger than anything we've handled locally, he admitted to Sarah after interviewing Emma. I'm calling in the FBI. If there are multiple victims in an organized operation, we need federal resources. Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to the broader implications of the story. How many other children were still trapped? How long had this operation been running? And most importantly, how had it remained hidden in such a small community? Detective, I know this is an active investigation, but the public needs to know. If there are other victims out there, media coverage might help identify them or encourage other survivors to come forward. Rodriguez nodded grimly. You're right, but we need to be careful about what information we release. If the perpetrators realize Emma escaped and talked, they might relocate or harm the other victims. As Sarah left the hospital that evening, Emma's words echoed in her mind. They have other kids too. Somewhere in the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, other children were still trapped, still suffering. What had started as a routine weather story had uncovered something much darker, and Sarah knew her work was just beginning. The next morning brought devastating news that would shake the entire investigation to its core. Detective Rodriguez called Sarah at 6 a.m. with an urgency in his voice she had never heard before. Sarah, we need to meet immediately. Something's happened that changes everything about Emma's case. An hour later, Sarah and Max sat across from Rodriguez in a small conference room at the Pine Ridge Police Department. FBI Special Agent Lisa Wong had driven up from Denver overnight and looked as tired as Sarah felt. The gravity of the situation was written across both law enforcement officers' faces. Emma's real name isn't Emma Chen, Agent Wong began without preamble. We ran her fingerprints through the national database last night. Her name is Emma Thompson, and she's been missing for 14 months, not 8. She was kidnapped from a shopping mall in Phoenix, Arizona. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 14 months? But she said 8 months. Trauma can affect memory in complex ways, Rodriguez explained. But here's the part that's going to shock you. Emma's case was one of 12 similar kidnappings across 4 states over the past 2 years. All girls between the ages of 11 and 15, all taken from public places, all with no witnesses. Agent Wong pulled out a thick folder filled with photographs and case files. We've been tracking this organization for months, but we've never had a survivor willing or able to talk. Emma is our first real break in what we believe is a sophisticated trafficking ring with connections across the western United States. Sarah studied the photographs of the missing girls. Each face represented a family destroyed, a life stolen. The scope of the operation was far beyond anything she had imagined when they found Emma in the snow. The house Emma described matches intelligence we've gathered about a compound, approximately 40 miles northeast of here, Agent Wong continued. We've been watching it for weeks, but we needed probable cause for a search warrant. Emma's testimony gives us that. When do you move? Sarah asked. Tomorrow at dawn, Rodriguez replied. But there's something else you need to know. We have reason to believe that some members of this organization have connections within local government and law enforcement. Emma's escape wasn't just lucky timing. It may have been the only window we'll get. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Corruption within their own community. Officials who were supposed to protect children instead facilitating their exploitation. The story was becoming darker and more complex by the hour. Agent Wong leaned forward. Sarah, we need your help. Your news coverage of Emma's rescue has already generated significant public attention. We want to use that to our advantage. How? We're going to announce a press conference for tomorrow afternoon, supposedly to update the public on Emma's condition and ask for tips about the trafficking operation. But it's really designed to draw the perpetrators out. If they think law enforcement is close to finding them, they might panic and make mistakes. Sarah understood immediately. You want them to think they have more time than they actually do? Exactly. The raid will happen tomorrow morning, but they won't know that. Meanwhile, your continued coverage keeps the story in the public eye and might encourage other victims or witnesses to come forward. Over the next few hours, Sarah worked closely with both agencies to craft news reports that would serve the investigation, while keeping Emma's specific location and condition confidential. The delicate balance between journalism and law enforcement cooperation was something she had navigated before, but never with stakes this high. That afternoon, Sarah returned to the hospital to check on Emma. The girl looked stronger physically, but the psychological impact of her ordeal was becoming more apparent as she recovered. Child psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster had been working with Emma throughout the day. She's incredibly resilient, Dr. Foster told Sarah privately, but she's carrying enormous guilt about leaving the other girls behind. She keeps asking if we're going to save them. In Emma's room, Sarah found the girl sitting up in bed, drawing pictures with crayons a nurse had brought her. Max immediately went to her side, and Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. I drew Max, Emma said, showing Sarah a surprisingly detailed crayon drawing of the golden retriever. And I drew the other girls too, so people know what they look like. Sarah looked at the drawings with growing amazement. Emma had created detailed portraits of 3 other girls, each with distinctive features and characteristics that could be crucial for identification. Emma, these are incredible. Can you tell me about each of them? This is Sophia, Emma said, pointing to a drawing of a girl with curly black hair. She's only 11 and she cries a lot because she misses her mom. This is Ashley. She's the oldest, maybe 16. She tries to take care of the rest of us. And this is May. She doesn't speak much English, but I think she's from somewhere in Asia. Sarah carefully photographed each drawing with Emma's permission. These images could be vital for identifying the other victims and reuniting them with their families. Emma, tomorrow the police are going to try to rescue your friends. Are you sure about the location of the house? Every detail you can remember could help save them. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I walked east from the house when I escaped, toward where the sun was coming up. I crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek, then went through a really thick part of the forest. The house, it has a green roof and there's a barn behind it that's falling down. Oh, and there were always dogs barking, mean dogs that the men used to scare us. Sarah made note of every detail. The green roof and the barn could be visible from aerial surveillance, helping pinpoint the exact location. "There's something else," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard the men talking about moving everyone soon. They were arguing about it. One of them said it was getting too dangerous to stay there." Sarah's blood ran cold. If the traffickers were planning to relocate, tomorrow's raid might be their only chance to rescue the other girls. She immediately called Detective Rodriguez with this critical information. Within an hour, the timeline for the operation was moved up. The raid would now happen at 4 a.m. instead of dawn, giving the perpetrators less time to execute any relocation plans. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital that evening, Emma grabbed her hand. "Promise me you'll tell everyone that Sophia..." "Ashley and May are good girls," Emma said, tears in her eyes. "They didn't do anything wrong. None of us did. We just want to go home." Sarah squeezed Emma's hand gently. "I promise. And Emma, tomorrow when they rescue your friends, they're going to know that you're the one who saved them. You're the bravest person I've ever met." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the 3 girls still trapped in the mountain compound, about Emma's courage in escaping and speaking out, and about the coordinated law enforcement operation that would determine their fate in just a few hours. Max seemed to sense her anxiety and stayed close to her side throughout the night. At 3 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Wong. "Operation commencing in 1 hour. Media briefing at 8 a.m. The rescue of Sophia, Ashley, and May was about to begin, and Sarah knew that whatever happened in the next few hours would either bring justice and healing to multiple families, or represent a devastating failure that could haunt the investigation for years to come. As she lay in the darkness waiting for dawn, Sarah reflected on how a routine weather assignment had led to uncovering one of the most significant criminal operations in the region's history. Sometimes the most important stories found you when you least expected them. At exactly 4:17 a.m., Sarah's phone rang with the call she had been both hoping for and dreading. Agent Wong's voice was tight with controlled emotion as she delivered the news that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the case. "We found the compound. We rescued 3 girls, but Sarah, it's not what we expected." An hour later, Sarah sat in the FBI command vehicle parked 2 miles from the raid site, trying to process the shocking developments that had unfolded during the pre-dawn operation. The rescue had been successful in saving Sophia, Ashley, and May, but what agents discovered at the compound revealed a conspiracy far more extensive and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The property belongs to Richard Blackwood, a prominent local businessman who owns half the commercial real estate in Pine Ridge, Detective Rodriguez explained, his voice filled with disgust. "He's been missing since yesterday, along with his entire security team." Agent Wong spread aerial photographs of the compound across a folding table. "The house was abandoned, but not recently. Based on the evidence we collected, they moved the operation at least a week ago, probably right after the blizzard started." "But you found the girls," Sarah said, confused by the somber mood despite the successful rescue. "We found them locked in a shipping container buried behind the main house," Agent Wong replied. "They were left there to die, Sarah. Blackwood and his people cleared out and left 3 children to starve or freeze to death." The brutality of it made Sarah feel physically sick. These weren't just criminals, they were monsters who viewed children as disposable commodities. The fact that Sophia, Ashley, and May were alive was nothing short of miraculous. How long were they in there? Based on their condition, probably since Tuesday night, the same time Emma escaped. Her escape must have triggered the evacuation, and rather than risk being caught transporting the other girls, they just abandoned them. Sarah thought about Emma's guilt over leaving her friends behind. The girl had actually saved their lives by escaping when she did, forcing the traffickers to abandon their plans and ultimately leading law enforcement to the compound. "There's more," Rodriguez continued grimly. "We found evidence of at least 12 other children who had been held at this location over the past 2 years. Computer files, photographs, financial records. This was a major hub in a trafficking network that spans from Mexico to Canada. The scope continued to expand beyond anything Sarah had initially imagined. What started with finding 1 child in the snow had uncovered an international criminal enterprise. "Where are Sophia, Ashley, and May now?" Sarah asked. "Denver Children's Hospital. They're in better physical condition than Emma was, but the psychological trauma is severe. All 3 girls are originally from different states. Sophia from New Mexico, Ashley from Utah, and May from California. We're working with their families for reunification. Agent Wong pulled out her tablet and showed Sarah security footage recovered from the compound. This is what we really need to talk about. The trafficking ring didn't operate in isolation. They had extensive local support and protection. The footage showed vehicles arriving at the compound at various times over several months. Sarah recognized some of the license plates and vehicle types. They belonged to local government officials, including the mayor's office and the county sheriff's department. How deep does the corruption go? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests involvement from the mayor's office, county commissioners, and at least 3 deputy sheriffs. They provided advance warning about law enforcement activities and helped cover up missing person reports. The revelation explained why none of the girls had appeared in missing person databases despite being gone for months or years. Reports had been filed but then mysteriously disappeared or were misclassified to avoid triggering broader investigations. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from her news director. The story was already attracting national attention, and major networks were requesting interviews. The pressure to break the story first was intense, but Sarah knew that premature reporting could jeopardize ongoing investigations and endanger other potential victims. Agent Wong, I need to ask directly, how much of this can I report right now? We need your help managing the information flow, Wong replied. Richard Blackwood and his associates are still at large. If they know how much we've discovered, they'll disappear permanently. But if we can make them think we're still investigating the original compound, they might stay close enough for us to track them down. Sarah understood. Her reporting would need to focus on the successful rescue of the 3 girls while downplaying the evidence of broader corruption and the extent of law enforcement knowledge about the trafficking network. There's something else, Rodriguez added. We found communications indicating that this network was planning to relocate their entire operation to a new location within the next few days. Emma's escape didn't just save her friends, it may have prevented dozens of other children from being trafficked through Pine Ridge. At 8 a.m., Sarah stood before a crowd of reporters and cameras for the scheduled press conference. Local media had been joined by representatives from national networks, and the story was beginning to receive international attention. Behind her, Agent Wong and Detective Rodriguez prepared to deliver carefully crafted statements designed to serve the ongoing investigation. 2 days ago, my dog Max and I found a 13-year-old girl nearly frozen to death in the woods behind Pine Ridge Community Center, Sarah began. What we've discovered since then has revealed a criminal operation that has devastated families across multiple states. Sarah announced the successful rescue of Sophia, Ashley, and May without revealing the specific details about how they were found or the abandonment of the compound. She showed Emma's drawings of the 3 girls, which had helped confirm their identities, and announced that all 4 victims were receiving medical care and would be reunited with their families. This investigation is ongoing, Agent Wong told the assembled media. We believe there may be additional victims and perpetrators involved. We're asking anyone with information about missing children or suspicious activities in the Pine Ridge area to contact the FBI tip line immediately. After the official press conference, Sarah received a call from Emma at the hospital. The girl had watched the announcement on television and was crying with relief that her friends had been found alive. I knew you would save them, Emma said through her tears. I knew Max would help find them too. Emma, you saved them by being brave enough to escape and tell us where they were. You're a hero. When can I see them? Sarah looked at Agent Wong, who nodded. Sophia, Ashley, and May are in Denver, about 3 hours away. Once the doctors say you're strong enough to travel, we'll arrange for you to see them. That afternoon, Sarah received an encrypted message from an unknown source. The message contained a single line. Blackwood's plane landed in Mexico City this morning. You have 48 hours before the trail goes cold permanently. Sarah immediately forwarded the message to Agent Wong. Whether it came from an insider trying to help or someone with their own agenda, the information suggested that time was running out to apprehend the main perpetrators. The next phase of the investigation would require international cooperation and resources far beyond what Pine Ridge law enforcement could provide. But thanks to Emma's courage and Max's instinct to search the woods that snowy morning, A trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years was finally beginning to crumble. As Sarah prepared her evening news report, she reflected on how the story had evolved from a weather update to an international criminal investigation. 4 brave girls had survived unimaginable trauma, and their rescue was sending shockwaves through a criminal network that had thought itself untouchable. The biggest revelations were still to come, and Sarah knew that the next few days would determine whether justice would truly be served for Emma, Sophia, Ashley, May, and all the other victims who had suffered in silence for far too long. 6 months after that fateful snowy morning, Sarah stood in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching as the final defendant in the Pine Ridge trafficking case received his sentence. The investigation that began with Max finding Emma in the woods had ultimately led to the arrests of 23 individuals across 5 countries and the rescue of 47 children. The scope of the criminal network had shocked even experienced federal investigators. Richard Blackwood's operation had been trafficking children for over 4 years, generating millions of dollars in profits while destroying countless lives. The corruption within Pine Ridge's local government had run so deep that the FBI had to bring in agents from other states to ensure the integrity of the investigation. Emma Thompson sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, flanked by her parents who had flown in from Phoenix. At 14 now, she had grown taller and stronger, but the determined look in her eyes remained unchanged from that day in the hospital when she first told Sarah her story. Beside her sat Sophia, Ashley, and May, along with their families. All 4 girls had testified during the trial, their courage helping to secure convictions that would keep their abusers in prison for decades. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Patricia Williams asked. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied. "On all counts of human trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering, we find the defendant Richard Blackwood guilty." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from the families and advocates who had followed the case. Sarah wiped away tears as she watched Emma's mother embrace her daughter. The girl who had been buried in snow and left to die had not only survived, but had become the key witness whose testimony brought down an entire criminal empire. After the sentencing, Sarah met with Agent Wong outside the courthouse. The FBI agent looked exhausted but satisfied as she reviewed the final case statistics. 47 children rescued, 23 arrests, 6 countries involved in the investigation, Wong summarized. "This case is going to change how we approach human trafficking investigations nationwide." "What about the corruption in Pine Ridge?" Sarah asked. "Mayor Patterson was sentenced to 15 years last month. 3 county commissioners got between 8 and 12 years each. The sheriff's department has been completely restructured under federal oversight. It's going to take years for that community to rebuild trust in its institutions." Sarah thought about the people of Pine Ridge, many of whom had been completely unaware of the criminal enterprise operating in their midst. The revelation that their elected officials had been complicit in child trafficking had shattered the town's sense of security and identity. "There's something else," Wong continued. "The intelligence we gathered from Blackwood's network led to operations in 12 other states. Last week, raids in Texas and Florida rescued another 31 children. Emma's escape created a domino effect that's still bringing down trafficking operations across the country." As Sarah drove back to Pine Ridge that evening, Max sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, she reflected on how profoundly the case had changed her own life. She had received numerous journalism awards for her coverage, including a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. But more importantly, she had formed lasting relationships with Emma and the other survivors. Emma had become something of a national symbol for trafficking survivors, speaking at conferences and working with advocacy organizations to help other children. Despite her trauma, she had channeled her experience into helping others and had started a foundation that trained search and rescue dogs to find missing children. The foundation was called Max's Mission, named after the golden retriever who had found Emma in the snow that December morning. Max himself had become a certified therapy dog and frequently visited children's hospitals and counseling centers, providing comfort to young trauma survivors. Sarah pulled into her driveway and found Emma's car already parked there. The girl visited regularly, having formed a deep bond with both Sarah and Max during her recovery. Tonight was special. It marked exactly 6 months since the rescue, and they had planned a quiet celebration. Sarah, Emma called out as she emerged from the house with Max bounding beside her. I have incredible news. What's that? The Foundation received a grant to expand our training program. We're going to be able to train 50 more search and rescue dogs this year, and we're partnering with law enforcement agencies in 8 states. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, marveling at how the frightened, half-frozen child she had found in the woods had transformed into this confident, determined young woman dedicated to helping others. Over dinner, Emma shared updates about the other survivors. Sophia had returned to school in New Mexico and was excelling in her studies. Ashley was working with a therapist to address her trauma, but had expressed interest in studying criminal justice. May had been reunited with her family in California and was slowly rebuilding her life with the support of specialists who understood her cultural and linguistic needs. You know what I think about sometimes? Emma said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. If you and Max hadn't been doing that weather story that day, if you hadn't followed Max into the woods, where would we all be now? Sarah considered the question. Without Emma's escape and testimony, the trafficking network would have continued operating. Dozens of other children would have been victimized. The corruption in Pine Ridge would have remained hidden. An anonymous tip had later revealed that Blackwood's organization had been planning to expand into 3 additional states. I think about that too, Sarah replied. But you know what? I believe that somehow justice finds a way. Maybe it wouldn't have been us, but someone would have stopped them eventually. Maybe, Emma said, scratching Max behind the ears. But I'm glad it was you and Max. I'm glad you listened when he told you something was wrong. As darkness fell, Sarah walked Emma to her car. The girl had her driver's license now, and had insisted on driving herself to dinner to demonstrate her independence. Before getting in the car, Emma turned back to Sarah. There's something I never told you about that night in the woods, she said. When I was lying there in the snow, I heard Max barking in the distance. For a minute, I thought I was dreaming or maybe dying, but then I heard your voice calling for him and I knew someone was coming to help. Even before you found me, I wasn't alone anymore. Tears came to Sarah's eyes as she watched Emma drive away. The girl had not only survived unimaginable trauma, but had emerged as a powerful advocate for other victims. Her courage in speaking out had dismantled a criminal network and prevented countless other children from suffering similar fates. Back inside the house, Sarah sat at her computer and began writing her final article about the Pine Ridge trafficking case. She had covered every aspect of the investigation and trial, but this piece would be different. It would focus on hope, resilience, and the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to heal and help others. Max curled up at her feet as she typed, occasionally lifting his head as if remembering that snowy morning when his instincts had led them into the woods. Sarah often wondered if Max truly understood the magnitude of what his discovery had accomplished. 47 children were now safe with their families because he had followed his nose into a cluster of pine trees behind a community center. As she finished writing, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Wong. Another trafficking operation discovered in Oregon. Survivors specifically asked for Emma to visit and share her story. Max's mission continues to grow. Sarah smiled as she looked down at Max, who seemed to sense that their work together was far from over. Somewhere other children needed to be found and rescued. Other families needed to be reunited. Other communities needed to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil could hide in plain sight. The story that began with a routine weather assignment had taught Sarah that journalism was about more than reporting the news. It was about bearing witness to injustice and amplifying the voices of those who needed to be heard. Emma's voice had brought down a criminal empire, but more importantly, it had inspired other survivors to come forward and seek help. Outside, fresh snow began to fall on Pine Ridge, covering the landscape in pristine white. But unlike that morning 6 months ago, this snow brought with it a sense of peace and renewal. The community was healing, the survivors were thriving, and somewhere in the distance Max's mission was training another dog to follow their instincts and find children who needed to be saved.